Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Independence Day weekend. It's a weekend where America celebrates its independence from the Brits back in 1776. And the perfect way to celebrate Independence Day weekend, or to kick it off really, is with some racing. And this weekend, NASCAR returned to Chicago. Not Chicagoland Speedway, but for the first time ever, NASCAR ran in the streets of Chicago, inside the Windy City, at Grant Park. And this weekend, even with Mother Nature playing a factor for most of the weekend, we saw the biggest wildcard race of the year and perhaps the biggest wildcard winner we will ever see. Let's get into all that went down in Chicago yesterday. Number 1, SVG victorious in the streets of Chicago. I'm talking about Shane van Gisbergen. I hope I said that right, by the way. Made his Cup Series debut, a 3-time Rally Supercar champion who has 80 wins racing in New Zealand and Australia, made his Cup debut yesterday in the streets of Chicago and captured his first NASCAR Cup Series win in the inaugural Grant Park 220 in the streets of Chicago, beating Justin Haley, Chase Elliott, Kyle Larson, and Kyle Busch for the victory. Not a lot of people knew who this guy was coming into this weekend's race, running the third Trackhouse car, also known as Project 91, which they've ran a couple of times, mainly with Kimi Räikkönen behind the wheel. This week they bring in a Rally Supercar champ who, again, has won 3 championships and has ran against someone that you're all pretty familiar with that's run NASCAR before, but also did Rally Car Champions stuff before he came to NASCAR and then went back to Australia. And I'm talking about Marcus Ambrose. These guys have raced against each other before. They're really good buds. And this weekend, Van Gisbergen made his Cup debut at Chicago, driving the number 91 for Trackhouse Racing. And the entire weekend, never put a foot wrong and just absolutely impressed the heck out of every fan, commentator, and race car driver on the racetrack. From the get-go, when the cars first rolled onto the streets to begin their practice, that 91 car was one of the fastest cars. He was actually the fastest car in the only practice session that we had. And then when it came to qualifying, he nearly won the pole for this race. Got out-qualified by the likes of Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick, but starting third for your Cup debut, that's not a bad performance at all. And when we got going in the green flag in the wet weather conditions, SVG did a great job keeping his car on the race circuit, or really on the streets, and literally stayed within the top 5 the entire first stage. And at times, he was catching whoever was leading the race, whether it was Tyler Reddick or Christopher Bell. That guy was absolutely impressing the heck out of me yesterday, watching him maintain pace with the leaders and learning the entire time. Now, another thing to keep in mind, actually, about the cars that he was racing yesterday, these cars, the next-gen cars, are actually very similar in exact shape or fashion of the rally cars that he runs down in Australia and New Zealand. The only difference is the driver's side is on the right side, and the shifter is where you use with your left hand. But in the Cup Series, you're sitting on the left side like you normally do in an American car, and you have the shifter right next to you on your right side. But this was no different for Shane van Gisbergen driving this car this weekend. I mean, he was unbelievable. When he made his first pit stop of the race, which was under green flag conditions, because the track was beginning to dry up a little bit, and some drivers were starting to put on dry tires. He came in pretty early in the beginning of Stage 2 when everyone started to make those changes from the wet weather tires to the dry tires. I was a little concerned about him, wondering how would he fare on this pit stop, because, of course, it's the first time he's ever pitted for tires during an automobile race that he's competed in. He came on the pit road and nice and neat into the pit box. Didn't go over the line. It didn't have the left front wheel, which is the out-of-bounds rule, especially with the way the pit box works. Pretty much the exact same like Watkins Glen or Road America. Did not put the left front wheel over the line, had a nice stop in the box, and had a good exit and didn't get caught for speeding. He was so impressive. Then the race got shuffled up a little bit later when we had a caution come out for, I think it may have been for the Alex Bowman-Denny Hamlin incident at turn 11, but that forced a lot of drivers to come to pit road, and at the time, NASCAR has said, hey, we're not going to be able to go 100 laps because of the time, how late of a start we got, which I'll get into that a little bit later. We're going to shorten the race to 75 laps. SVG pitted with a lot of the other front runners and restarted in about the 18th position with 20 laps to go. And he came ripping through that field, passing drivers, outbraking them at every possible point of the circuit where he could pass, or you could pass in general, and he just fought his way up to the field. When I saw him get to the top 3 with 10 to go, I'm like, yeah, Van Gisbergen's going to win this race. There's no way Justin Haley or Chase Elliott can hold him off, especially with the fresher tires that he had versus the front two, which were on a different strategy, but just trying to make it home the end of the race. But Van Gisbergen was able to take the lead, he thought, with about 8 laps to go until the caution came out for Martin Truex Jr. hitting the tire barrier in turn 1. That set up a restart, but Van Gisbergen, right on the first few corners of that restart, took the lead from Justin Haley, but then Haley passed him back on the straightaway heading down to turn 4, but Van Gisbergen let him go by, and he waited for Haley to make a mistake into turn 4 and actually outbraked him into turn 4 and took the lead back and never looked back. He was on cruise control, had a little bit of scare late when we had a late race restart set up overtime because of a wreck in turn 1 involving Bubba Wallace and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. But on the restart, Van Gisbergen had no pressure whatsoever, drove away, and came across the finish line in first place. He was so happy, and he was like on the radio, what do I do now? Because this is the first time I'm running a stock car in NASCAR. I don't know how to celebrate. You go burn it down. And by the way, fine burnout for your first time in a cup car. And he was just, the whole crowd was in it the entire time watching this guy come from New Zealand, a Kiwi, to drive in the Cup Series for the first time ever and absolutely impressed the heck out of everybody. He was so impressive. Chase Elliott said he's going to go back and tell his buddies how bad we are here in NASCAR because SVG was just perfect the entire day. I mean, sometimes you can't be perfect to win a race. Sometimes you got to be lucky or good. But in this case, SVG was just that damn good yesterday. That was an impressive performance. And after he won the race, he was interviewed asking, would you consider coming back to NASCAR, maybe considering down the road? He said, I got one more year with rally cars, and I might consider it for 2025. Now, granted, the guy's 34 years old. He's not really that young. So by the time he decides to maybe join NASCAR, he will be 35, almost 36 years old. But we're open to him. I mean, if you want to come to NASCAR full-time in the near future, SVG, the door is wide open, my friend. Hell, the door is wide open for you to come to any other road course race this year that doesn't conflict with your racing schedule. You're free to come to the Charlotte Roval. I think you do very well there. The Indianapolis road course, maybe. Even Watkins Glen. But I'm just saying most of the races that Trackhouse runs Project 91. But the door's open for this guy to come back, and he's really been aligned with Trackhouse to help develop their road course program with their drivers Ross Chastain and Daniel Suarez. But back-to-back weeks, Trackhouse Racing is victorious in NASCAR. They're building something special with this organization. And to have this Kiwi come in from New Zealand to race in NASCAR pretty much identical to the rally cars he runs, that was an impressive performance yesterday by Shane van Gisbergen. Tip of the cap to that man yesterday. What a fine job he did. A great performance by him in that 91 team yesterday. And oh, by the way, the guy on the pit box for him is no stranger to winning races and actually is known to win a championship. And I'm talking about Darian Grubb, who won the championship with Tony Stewart in 2011. He was on top of the pit box yesterday. I'm like, who's the crew chief? And they said Darian Grubb. I'm like, really? That's a name that knows how to win races and a championship. So great performance all day long by Project 91 and Shane van Gisbergen. Congratulations, buddy, on your first Cup Series win. Number 2, drivers that started out the race rough end up with solid results. I'm talking about 3 of our top 5 finishers. Justin Haley in second place, Chase Elliott in third place, and Kyle Busch in fifth place. Let's start with Justin Haley. So they actually had to start dead last in this race. They didn't get to qualify the car because they wrecked it in practice on Saturday. And he said he only got about 20 minutes in the simulator to practice because they weren't able to qualify. So they started dead last in the race, slowly worked their way up to the field, but we're still hovering around the top 20 for the most part of the race. Well, when NASCAR made the decision that we're going to be cutting the race short 25 laps from the scheduled distance, they decided to pull the trigger in the 31 camp. I think his crew chief is, if I'm not mistaken, Trent Owens. I might be wrong, but I think he is Justin Haley's crew chief still. I might be wrong, but I'm not sure. He elected to keep Justin Haley on the track thinking, we're going to gamble, and hopefully we get a lot of cautions that it might cut it short, or if we get plenty of cautions, we can go the rest of the way on fuel. Because the fuel window, the first time ever in this street course, was 33 to 36 laps. I think that's what it was. May have been 35 to 38. Around that area, though. So Haley stayed out there, and Haley's been a good road course racer. It's just that he hasn't been able to perform in the Cup Series since he came over, and in these next-gen cars, it's taken time. But when he got out front yesterday in the clean air, he was so good. Never put a foot wrong. He was doing a great job. He just was wearing out those rear tires at points late in the race when it came down to the end of the race. And with SVG closing in on him, he had a lot of pressure on himself to try to hold him back. But those tires, the right rears, again, they were shot from all that locking up, particularly going into turn 4. That's where it was his Achilles heel. But regardless, for him to come away with a second place finish for a team that's been kind of mad this year, walking out there was a second place, it's not a bad job by Justin Haley and that 31 team. Same goes for Mr. Road Course King himself, Chase Elliott. He was not that impressive on Saturday. He was 20th in practice, and by the time we got to qualifying, he was close to possibly advancing into the top 10 to advance to the final round of qualifying, following our eventual winner SVG into the area where South Michigan Avenue is. He hit the wall and ultimately got eliminated and had to start at the rear in a backup car. And like Haley, it was a little bit of a challenge for them to try to work their way through the field, but with cars pitting under green, they started to pass a few guys, then they came in for their pit stop, and on the exit, Elliott actually hit the tire barrier in turn 2. Not hard though, he was able to continue, and thankfully, cautions played their way for them to fix the damage, pass a few more guys, and like Haley, they were one of the cars that gambled to stay out. I was a little worried about both of those two, Haley and Elliott, because would they have enough fuel to make it the rest of the way if we get a good amount of cautions, which we did, but you don't know if you maybe stepped over the line regarding how much fuel is left in the car. Do we have the right calculations to make it the rest of the way? Even with overtime, I was a little skeptical about them making it, but they both came out with good finishes. Elliott at times was catching Justin Haley, whether Haley was leading or in second place behind SVG. But it seemed like Elliott was not able to outbrake the 31 car. He was able to outpace him, but not outbrake him in some sections because, again, this is a new course that we're trying in NASCAR with these streets. But Elliott to come away from a backup car and take it home with a third place finish on the podium, that's a good result. Now again, with 8 races to go, still going to need a win. He only gained 9 points yesterday by finishing ahead of some of those guys that were ahead of him in points. He's now 55 below, 16th. Again, going to need a win. The good news is next week's his home track, and he won there last year in dominating fashion. So it's possible he could eventually win, and I think he will, but the clock is kind of ticking. But despite all that, a great run for Chase Elliott yesterday. And same goes for Kyle Busch. I tell you what, this year on road courses with RCR, it's the best I've seen him in years. And at the start of yesterday, he was the first caution of the race going into turn 6, which was the trouble turn yesterday. He went into the barrier at turn 6, and I thought, oh my goodness, he's done. Because when you're transitioning from parts of the track is concrete and some of it transitions to asphalt, there's a little bit of there's not a lot of traction in those sections, especially when the wet weather we were running at the start. Kyle went into the turn 6 barrier, but thankfully, there wasn't a whole lot of damage to the car. But he was stuck in the middle of the pack, and then, like most drivers, he actually pitted a couple laps before NASCAR made the decision to shorten the race. And when all the rest of the leaders that had stayed out in previous laps pitted, Kyle Busch found himself inside the top 5. And he was keeping pace with the leaders. He had a good race car. Just the tires were a little bit older, but he had good pace in that race car. For him to be the first caution yesterday and come back to finish 5th, this has just been a big year for Kyle Busch with his brand new team, Richard Childress Racing. So my hat's off to him. My hat's off again to great comebacks by Haley, Elliott, and Kyle Busch yesterday. Great job by all 3 of those guys. Number 3, heartbreak for drivers that were so strong yesterday. Let's start off with, I think, the guy that probably was going to win this race with the track position he had. I'm talking about Christopher Bell, a man who has won 2 times on road courses. His first Cup win actually was on a road course at Daytona in 2021 and won the Roval last year when he was in a must-win situation. He was dominant at the start of the first 2 stages yesterday, won both stages, collecting 2 extra playoff points to carry to the playoffs. Remember, he has to win at the Bristol Dirt Race. He looked to be untouchable yesterday. But when that caution came out and then NASCAR made the decision that everyone were going to be shortening the race, Christopher Bell was not happy, saying they screwed us. There's another term, but I'm not going to say it because that's not appropriate for younger viewers out there. But Christopher Bell was not happy with that, and he unfortunately pitted, and he got stuck back in that traffic and was part of a traffic jam at turn 11 because Kevin Harvick got turned by Corey LaJoie, and the part of turn 11 was blocked. No one could go anywhere in that area. Some guys snuck through, including eventual winner SVG, but Christopher Bell was stuck back there, and he tried to get back to the front, but it was just impossible back there, even with the fresh tires he was on, and made a mistake out going a little too hard on the brakes into turn 1 and actually hit the tire barrier, and all Christopher Bell could muster yesterday was an 18th place finish. Pretty disappointing for a man that was so strong at the beginning of yesterday's race. Then we go to the other Toyota driver, Tyler Reddick, who was the outside pole sitter. Was second fiddle to Denny Hamlin at the first lap, and then lap 2, he took the lead when Denny Hamlin hit the tire barrier in turn 2, even though the 11 was able to continue. Reddick was great when he was out front. Then he lost the lead to Reddick, but Bell, but hung tough with him the entire time. But he, like Bell and a lot of those guys, were caught by NASCAR's decision to shorten the race, and he had to fight his way back to the field, and he was working hard. He was in the top 5 late, and looked like he had the car that could have won this race. But like a lot of people yesterday, he went into the turn 6 barrier and ultimately took him out of contention for the victory and settled for 28th. These last few weeks of Reddick have not been good to him. They've had the speed in their cars, but they just haven't had the luck to go through with it. So it's a pretty bummer for them. And then another heartbreak was Austin Dillon. Yes, I said Austin Dillon because recently the road course program for the 3 team has improved. They had 2 top 10 finishes last year, which were career best for him on road courses, both 10th place finishes at COTA and the Charlotte Roval. Yesterday, like Elliott and Haley, he stayed out late in the race on the same strategy as those 2 because they had pitted a couple laps before the guys like Kyle Busch and Logano and Byron, and then many laps before guys like Larson, SVG, and Bell and Reddick and Truex and those guys. He was in position and hounding Justin Haley late in the race with 14 laps to go. It looked like Dillon had something for that 31 car. But coming out of turn 12 onto the main straight, he clipped the turn 12 wall and went into the tire barrier, breaking the left front toe link and taking him out of contention for the win. It sucks because Dillon was doing a fine job with the track position he had up there. But luckily, he was able to back the car up to pit road because the car was going slow. He let everybody go by, and he's like, I'm not going to cause a caution. I'm going to just back it into pit road and call it a day and not try to do a David Rudiman from Martinsville in 2012 and just stop on the track and ultimately affect the outcome of the race. It really wouldn't have had any effect whatsoever. I still think it was the 91's race. But it was really tough for those 3 guys yesterday that had great opportunities to win the race, but unfortunately fell the wayside due to bad luck for the most part. Number 4, Mother Nature. Oh my goodness gracious. On a weekend that was supposed to be very promising, NASCAR gaining a lot of momentum into this first ever street course race they were running. Only for Saturday, when we were running the Xfinity race, we had a lightning delay because there was lightning within 30 miles of the street circuit, and we had to pause the race. And when it started to rain and the lightning began to intensify, we decided to pull the plug on Saturday's Xfinity race and run it Sunday morning. Well, Mother Nature did not leave Chicago. I mean, she rained so hard, I think, gave Chicago as much rain as they're going to have for the entire month of July. I'm dead serious. I mean, I saw pictures on social media from the streets. There were like floods, cars going backwards, unbelievable. It didn't really affect so much the street course. Well, it kind of did. I mean, it didn't like Carson carried away by the massive rain floods. But at the same time, we weren't able to run in those type of conditions in monsoon. We learned from our mistakes from the COTA race in 2021 when we went there, and it was a monsoon the entire time, especially late in the race. That's why we had to red flag and eventually called it late and gave Chase Elliott the victory. We can't really control anything about the weather. We tried to get the Xfinity race in yesterday because we were 2 laps shy from halfway. But NASCAR said, we can't do it. We're going to pull the plug. Race is canceled, and they declared Cole Custer the victor. And it did not receive a lot of, good vibes from everybody on social media. It was not really a good thing. I mean, again, we cannot control the weather, and it's unfortunate. And it's also fortunate because it canceled the concerts that weekend with the Chainsmokers and Miranda Lambert. It definitely sucked about that, but we wanted to have the racing product. And believe it or not, we got the command that drivers were giving call to their cars. I'm like, okay, that's something we're going to give it a shot because the rain was beginning to let up. Had that rain not let up, and about 15 minutes prior to it letting up, NASCAR was about ready to say, pull the cord, we're not racing today. We would have been racing today if we decided to pull the plug yesterday. But when the rain began to let up, NASCAR said, we're going to go race. So I do thank Mother Nature for, even though you kind of, made the Xfinity race situation look a little rough, you were able to pass by and let the Cup Series go do their thing for this first ever street race. And the reason why, again, we started a little hour and a half later than we were supposed to for the race. That's why NASCAR decided, especially when we were running wet weather conditions and then the track began to dry up a little bit, we still said, we're going to shorten it to 75 laps. Again, it did not receive some good backlash from drivers on the radio, particularly Christopher Bell. But at the same time, we wanted to get the full 100 laps in. I would have loved to see a full 100 laps around the circuit. But NASCAR did what they had to do. And I mean, they did let the drivers know over the radio and say, like, here's the situation. It's going to be 25 laps shorter. Lap 75 is supposed to be the scheduled conclusion of this race. Go give them hell. These final remaining laps are running. I think they made the decision when it was about 29 laps from when they said the finish was supposed to be at 75. It was about 54 laps from what was supposed to be the scheduled distance, and then they shortened it. So around lap 46, they said, hey, you got 29 laps left. It's not 100 laps that we're running. You've got 75. It's 75 laps. You've got 29 laps to finish this thing. So it happened, and we had a little bit of overtime, but we still had some daylight to finish the race. I will say, good on NASCAR to make the decision to say, we're shortening it, and gave them a heads up on the radio. I know some were not happy about it, but they did what they had to do. And it sucked about Mother Nature for the most part, but we were able to get the cup race in, and that was what's most important. And number 5, my overall thoughts of the Chicago experience this weekend. For the first time ever, NASCAR tried street course racing, something that's never been done before. We've seen IndyCar and Formula One do it over the years. The Cup Series has never done anything like this before in the history of the sport. For 75 years, we've done things. We've tried, Roval races. Like we started in 2018 at Charlotte Roval, and that has turned out to be a good venue. We went back to dirt racing. We did at Bristol. It's been hit or miss, depending on who you ask, but I do kind of enjoyed it. We've gone to new venues. We went back to North Wilkesboro for the first time since 1996, and then yesterday, we tried street course racing with the Cup Series. And when we did get the race in, what I saw in that street circuit yesterday was phenomenal. The racing was really, really good the entire time. The strategy and, the different cars late in the race with a little bit of parody, that's what made it even more entertaining. And to see a guy who has never run a Cup car before come flying to the field with 20 laps to go from 18th to win the thing. Yesterday, that racing was so fun. The passing up and it was tough to pass at times, but when we did have some of that, we had some good battles, not just for the lead, but for second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. It was unbelievable. And the fans in attendance yesterday, shout out to them for sticking out through that rain, and they had a good time yesterday. And a good amount of those fans yesterday were brand new to NASCAR. And they have been fans that have watched the Chicago Bulls over the years win championships, especially when they had Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. They've watched the Chicago Bears. They've seen the Chicago Cubs win the World Series recently in 2016. The Chicago White Sox been, hitter there. They've seen the Blackhawks win championships in the NHL, but never have these people come to see a NASCAR race. And what they got yesterday, they got money's worth for the first time ever. A lot of them so far in media are saying, I like that. That was so much fun. My first time ever. That was a blast. I look forward to watching next weekend's race. We're trying to get new fans into the sport, and I think this weekend we hit a home run with the race and attracting some new people to the sport. So good job by NASCAR. Even with Mother Nature playing a little bit of a damper at times, we got the racing yesterday, and we got good racing on top of it. It was a lot of fun. And do I think that Chicago street course racing, do I think street course racing works in NASCAR right now? My answer to that is hell yes. That was so much fun. I enjoyed it a lot. Now, I think we are scheduled to do this again in Chicago next year. The big question is, are we going to extend it for a few more years possibly? Are we going to try other cities to do street course racing and to watch this? IndyCar Series does the streets of Toronto. You could think we could go up there. Although I think that's a little too bumpy for the cars, in all honesty. I don't think it'd be good, especially with the next-gen cars. But who knows? But I thoroughly enjoyed yesterday's race a lot. It was so much fun, and the drama at the end of the race between who was going to win and SVG, can he hold off everybody behind him for his first Cup win and his Cup debut? That was unbelievable yesterday. I enjoyed it. Chicago street course racing, I loved it yesterday. That was an unbelievable event. So that was unbelievable. Tomorrow is Independence Day, the 4th of July, where many, many years ago in 1776, on July 4th, Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and many other, patriots in Philadelphia decided to form the Declaration of Independence, signifying to the Brits, hey, we want to be free. We are declaring our independence from you. We are a unity, and we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That's what Independence Day is all about. And tomorrow is a good opportunity to sit back with your family and friends, have a nice cookout, go to the pool, go to the parade, watch the fireworks, depending that the weather is good in your area for the most part. But tomorrow is a day of celebrating independence. And as Ricky Stenhouse Jr. said when he won that Daytona race in 2017, America 1776, we are the champs. Indeed, we are. America, baby. America. But I thoroughly enjoyed yesterday's street course racing. It was a lot of fun. So, with that being said, next weekend we are off to Atlanta. And for the first time since 2014, we're going under the lights. And this 400-mile event, it should be a very interesting one. Racing under the lights with this type of racing now that we have at Atlanta since the repave and the racing that we started starting last year in 2022, it should be an interesting one. The big question marks, Chase Elliott, the hometown hero, dominated last year's race. Can he back it up this year? Will Corey LaJoie make up for the one that nearly he got last year? We shall see. Or we have a thrilling finish like we did earlier this year between former teammates and Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski late. All those questions will hopefully be answered by the conclusion of next Sunday night's race. It is a Sunday night event, by the way, so don't forget. Tune in 6:30 p.m. on USA Network for that race. But thoroughly enjoyed, again, this weekend's race, including radio-style broadcasts with Rick Allen and Steve Letarte in the booth with Mike Bagley, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and Jeff Burton in the corners. It was so much fun. I really enjoyed yesterday's race. So I hope you all enjoyed it too, and I hope you all have a wonderful Independence Day tomorrow. Subscribe, like, and congrats once again to Shane van Gisbergen and Project 91 Trackhouse Racing Team on their win in the inaugural street course race in Chicago yesterday. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Have a wonderful Independence Day tomorrow. And as always, let's go racing!